Welcome to the Self-Publishing School podcast. This is the podcast to listen to if you're an aspiring writer or an author who wants to be more successful. On this show, you'll learn how to write and launch a book successfully, all from the top authors and people just like you who are doing it at the highest level. I'm your host, Chandler Bolt, the founder of Self-Publishing School, the author of the book called Published, and the CEO of selfpublishing.com. For free training on how to publish a book that sells 10,000 copies, go to selfpublishing.com/free training. Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today is my good friend, Ray Edwards. Now, if you don't know Ray, Ray is a communications strategist, copywriter, best-selling author, speaker, and host of one of the top iTunes business podcasts. He's worked with Fortune 500 companies and with some of the most powerful voices in leadership and business. His clients include New York Times bestselling authors Tony Robbins, Jack Canfield, Mark Victor Hansen, and many, many more. And he's also been featured on Forbes.com, socialmediaexaminer.com, and entrepreneur.com. And now Ray's a friend of mine and just all around good person. I love this, and I love what we're about to talk about because he kind of comes at it from both angles, from a content creation angle, but then also from a writing words that sell angle, which is very important and obviously very rare for someone to have both of those skills. So I'm super excited to dive into all of that stuff in this interview. Ray, welcome. So great to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I appreciate you inviting me, and I'm excited about this too.
So take us back for a little bit to kind of how you got into writing, and especially why you decided to write your first book. What was the purpose behind that?
Well, I got into writing just because it's something that I enjoyed doing. I wrote since the time I can remember how to write. I was writing stories in my spiral-bound notebook when I was in elementary school. And one day it occurred to me, I could actually make a living doing this. And at that time I was in the radio industry, and I realized I had been making a living writing. I've been writing radio commercials and scripts and helping put together promotions and proposals. And I realized, oh, you know what they're really paying me for is to write. And I had always dreamed of being a quote writer and making my living writing, like books, like what we all think of when we think of that man is a writer. He lives in a house by the ocean in Vermont. And is that even geographically possible? Anyway, he
I have no clue.
And he has a typewriter, and he gets paid millions of dollars to write brilliant things. That's kind of the romantic image I had. But I had been selling things, and I'd been in an entrepreneurial family, and I realized that the typical writer was a starving artist kind of person, and I was interested in the artist part, but not the starving part. So I realized, well, I can write and I can sell, and I can do both things at the same time. And so thus was born my business as a copywriter for hire. I was the guy that artists hired when they needed to sell their stuff. They didn't want to sell it because they felt like the two things were separate worlds. And I was the guy who came in and said, oh, I can totally sell your stuff for you. And they paid me a lot of money for that. And I wrote my book. First reason was I got tired of answering the same questions over and over again. So I thought, if I write them down and I put them in a book, then I can hand them the answers and they can pay me for them. Winner.
So how long were you a copywriter before you wrote your first book?
Let's see. That would have been just probably about 4 years. And it was a big leap for me, Chandler, because my mentors at the time, I've always had paid mentors, people who advise me, consult, coach me, and they were telling me this is what you need to do. And I was like, yeah, but I've only been doing this in this way, like direct response, online copywriting for a few years. And there's guys who've been doing it for decades. And why would anybody want to hear from me? And this was my first experience with that dance of, well, why would anybody, there's other people. Why does anybody want to hear from me about diet, about exercise, about making money, about real estate, about telling stories? Well, it's because it's the same reason why there's always a new album coming out from your favorite group, Need to Breathe. Why there's always a new book coming out by Stephen King. Why you're always looking for the next novel or the next diet book or the next how to make money book, because we're all always looking for a fresh new voice. So we've all got a voice that somebody wants to hear. I like to say it this way, Chandler. There's there's a group of people that will only respond to your voice when it comes to your message. And if you don't put your message out there, they may never get the message. So my mentors taught me that. I wrote the book on copywriting, and it started up a whole new dimension of my career, my business. It made so many things possible. I mean, that first book I've only made, probably total, I've made $18,000 directly off the book. But indirectly, because of the book, I've made probably $1 million. And then that led to other things that are multi-million dollars. So it's hard to say. I could easily tell you and be telling the truth, I've made millions of dollars off that one book. Now it's indirect, and one thing led to another, but that's kind of how the story unfolded for me.
So talk about kind of what's your process as a copywriter, and then how is that different from writing copy, writing for other people, as you said, to sell their stuff, to then packaging your writing into a book?
I feel kind of dumb answering this question because I have a process for writing copy. I have frameworks. I have an outline. I have a very specific process that I follow. And it's very organized. I do lots of reading. I do lots of study. I take lots of notes. I write down lots of little bits and pieces of information I want to convey. And then I just put it all into the outline that I basically have. And I stitch it all together with sentences and paragraphs and make it all flow from beginning to end. I know where I need to start, the points I need to get across, the chain of logic I need to use to persuade people, and then how I reach a conclusion and ask them to make a decision to buy or to believe or to do something. For some reason, I thought writing a book would be different. So I put on my literary hat, and suddenly writing became very hard. Until one day I had the epiphany, now wait a minute, this is just one dang big long sales letter, really. Because even though I'm not selling a product, I'm selling a set of ideas and practices. And if I take the same approach writing this book that I took writing a sales letter, it should be easy. And it was. It just flowed because, in copywriting, one of the things we have to work with people on when they're learning how to write copy is to stop writing like their English teacher taught them how to write and start writing the way they talk, conversationally. And people relate to that kind of writing. That's why a James Patterson novel is probably not your English composition professor's favorite piece of writing, because it's very colloquial and there's lots of sentence fragments, and there's a paragraph that consists of 2 sentences followed by a paragraph that consists of 1 sentence, and a chapter is 2 pages long, and it breaks all the rules. And yet, out of all the novelists in the world, the person who's being read the most right now as we speak, the most number of books that are open with people reading them at this moment in the world is James Patterson, who breaks all those rules in his writing. And so when I realized it could be conversational, it could just flow, then the process became a lot easier for me. And I just, I start with what's the main idea of what I want to get across? What's the main conclusion I want people to reach? I want them to buy something, to believe something, to do something, to feel empowered to do something. And then I map out, well, how do I get there? What's the path? And then I just start writing.
And what does that path usually look like? Or what, can you take us a little bit through like your copy framework and how that can switch over to writing the book?
Yeah, perfectly. So I have this framework called the pastor framework for writing copy. And I chose that word not because I want you to become a preacher. I chose it because it originally meant to be a shepherd. And you think about it, well, what does the shepherd do? The shepherd takes care of the sheep, cares for the flock, protects them, makes sure they're fed, that they're watered, that they're protected from the elements, that they're protected from predators, and is basically in charge of caring for the sheep. And, in our own culture, we've heard the story that the good shepherd laid down his life for the sheep. And so if we're selling and we're using a pastor framework, and I'm persuading you to be a shepherd with your customers, then when you come from that mindset, it's impossible for you to be pushy or salesy or sleazy, because a shepherd is none of those things. Shepherd has your best interest at heart, and you're going to have the best interest of your customers at heart, and you're only going to want them to make a decision that's in their best interest, whether it's to buy from you or not. And that takes all the ickiness and grossness out of selling. And so I also chose that word because it helped me build an acronym, which is the outline of the copy. It's PASTOR. P stands for person, problem, and pain. You need to know the person to whom you're writing. What's their world like? What's the problem they experience that you're going to help them solve? And every piece of writing solves a problem. even a novel, even a children's novel solves a problem. In that case, it's probably boredom, but it's still a problem. And what's the pain that the person is experiencing that you're going to help them relieve? You need to understand those things and write about those things. And it can be as simple as saying, look, you and I are probably a lot alike. We're both writers. We both have the challenge of putting words on paper and getting an entire book written. And that's kind of painful. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of discipline. We have to set aside time. We have to get a certain number of words out every day. So what am I doing? I'm speaking to the person. I'm talking about the problem. And I'm beginning to describe the pain. You sit down at the typewriter, listen to me, at the computer, at the keyboard, and you're writing, maybe you're writing a sales letter to sell your product or service. And the page is blank. This is pain. And then the A stands for amplify. First, you amplify the pain. So this is horrible because what's going to happen if you don't solve this problem? Well, you're not going to get the words written that sell your product or service, and you're not going to make any money, and you're going to go broke, and everybody's going to think you're a failure, and they're finally going to know the real truth that you just don't have what it takes. That's amplifying the pain, the consequences of what happens if I don't solve this problem. And A also stands for aspiration. People will say to me, well, Ray, that amplify thing sounds like you're selling with fear, and I don't feel comfortable with that. And I understand the sentiment behind that, but I'm not a believer in playing up the fear card so much that we're scaring people into buying. But I am an advocate of being real with people and just, telling it like it is. Like if you're writing to people about saving for their retirement, you need to tell them that the truth is 95% of people, when they reach age 65, are either dead or dead broke. If they're still alive, they probably still have to work to pay their bills, or they're eating dog food. Now, is that using a scare tactic? No. Is it telling them a scary reality? Yes. So as soon as you make that reality, as you amplify it, you make it real for them. You make them realize, hey, I'm going to be 70 years old and me standing at the door at Walmart saying, hi, welcome to Walmart. Not the future I had planned for myself. Then we need to turn to their aspiration. Well, what is it you really want? What you really want is to be able to decide which tropical island you're going to spend the winter on when you're 70. That's what you really want. So you speak to their aspiration. And then we move to the S, which is the story, the struggle, the solution, and the system. So you tell the story of how you have struggled with this same problem that we're addressing in this sales piece. The struggle that you had you get into detail about how tough it was, about why it was tough, about what was tough about it. Then how you figured out the solution and how you actually turn the solution into a system. And the system might be, depending on what you're selling, it could be a teaching, a way of doing a certain task, like how to write copy that sells, or how to self-publish your book. Or it could be how to be in better shape, how to eat more healthily, about how to have better relationships, about how to save for retirement. It could be about anything at all that you have expertise in that you're trying to share with the world. And you put it into a system that works for other people too, so that it's not just about you, it's about helping other people. And then that comes to the T of pastor, which is for testimony and transformation. So you have other people's stories that you're able to share in your book or in your sales letter. You have other people's stories about how they used your solution, your system, to achieve the same outcome that you achieved. And within those testimonies, each one contains a story of transformation about how I went from a 98-pound weakling who's getting sand kicked in his face on the beach to Charles Atlas, Mr. Universe, or whatever those old ads were. There's the new variation became Body for Life, and now there's P90X, and there's the Insanity workout, and it's really all the same story, right? I went from weak and fat and out of shape to muscular and fit, and look out, this guy's got the juice, so stay away from him. So it's a transformation. And then the O stands for the offer. And this is where this is what I have to sell you, and this is how much it costs. And in the offer, you need to spend about 20% of your time talking about the deliverables. So what I'm selling you is a book, or what I'm selling you is a set of DVDs, or it's a seminar or workshop or a home study course or online study course. And 80% of your time in speaking about the offer is about the transformation that each part of it brings. Because nobody woke up this morning saying, gosh, what I hope today is that I'll be able to watch an infomercial where the P90X people will sell me their wall chart and their chin-up bar and their DVDs. because I really need all those things. That's not what we were thinking, but we start watching and we realize, oh, those guys look like me now. They look like that 90 days ago. And then 90 days later, they look like that. They're all chiseled and muscular and lean. And the ladies look at them when they walk by and they don't laugh or they don't go, ew. So I want to be like that guy. So I want that transformation. So that's the offer. The offer is not the stuff. The offer is the magic that happens. And then the R of pastor stands for request a response. Ask for the sale. And as we all know, ask and ye shall receive, at least a certain percentage of the time. So that's what the pastor framework stands for. And it works not only for writing sales copy, but it'll work. If you think about it, you're always selling something. You're selling an idea. You're selling belief in a storyline if you're writing fiction. You're selling a product. You're selling people on the fact that they should do something or they can do something. So you're always requesting a response. You're always making an offer. And you can use this framework to write a blog post, a chapter in a book, the entire outline of a book, any kind of writing. This is just my way of describing what I think of as the universal framework for writing persuasively.
And how would you modify this for book form? Is that kind of like the overarching structure that then you break down chapter by chapter, or what does that kind of look like?
If you can picture an arc, so that's the overarching arc of the book. And then within, like for a nonfiction book, I would think of it as probably as being in 3 parts, the beginning, the middle, and the end. But I mean, sometimes we need to be reminded of these basic things. And so like each of those 3 parts maybe has 3 parts, and those are chapters, and each chapter reflects the larger structure. So it's kind of like fractals. You know how you look at pictures of trees from space, you look at the coastline and it looks sort of has a certain shape and texture to it. And you zoom into the forest and it has that same shape and texture, and you zoom into the molecules, they have that same shape and texture. That's fractal. It's the same way out, zoomed out as it is way zoomed in. So it's the same thing with writing a book. It's the same overarching structure, which is the same structure for each section of the book, which is the same structure for each chapter of the book. So each chapter, if you think of it, writing it, I mean, look at the writing of Tim Ferriss. One of the genius things that he does, if you look at something like the 4-Hour Chef or the 4-Hour Body, or even the 4-Hour Work Week, every chapter stands on its own. If you look at them, you could read just that chapter and not feel like you were missing something. And that's because he's got that same underlying structure. He has no idea who I am or what my system is, as far as I know, unless he knows everything, which sometimes I think he does. But he uses that same universal structure. He talks about who the person is he's writing to, what their problem is, what the pain is they're feeling, what'll happen if they don't solve the problem, what they're aspiring to, what's the story, what's his struggle in solving it, what system did he come up with. Here's the transformation that happened for people on the slow carb diet. So my offer is, if you'll try this diet, you'll lose a lot of weight quickly. You won't be hungry. You get to eat great food. And so his call to action is try the diet, and here's how you do it, and let me know what you think. So, and then that's part of a bigger overarching story of the entire book, the 4-Hour Body, how you optimize your health and become superhuman and do all the other things that the title promises that you can do of that book. Mm-hmm. It's really the same structure, either small or large, chapter, section, entire book.
Got it. And what did it take for you to realize, you said, as you were part of the way into your book, that I should just do it this way? And then how did that change how you approach your writing?
Well, you know, I had what I call a BFO, the blinding flash of the obvious. For some reason, I thought that writing a book had to be different. I felt like you have to sit down and you have to start with a blank page and you type chapter 1. It was a dark and stormy night. And then you just write from there until you get to chapter 12 and you've got 200 pages and you're done. And of course I knew that you should outline and you should jot down what each chapter was about, but I don't have a better explanation, and I just didn't connect the dots and realize this framework that I developed for writing sales copy is really underneath every structured piece of writing that attempts to persuade people either to do something, believe something, be empowered. We're always persuading people either that they should do something or that they can do something. Even if you think you're just conveying information, Like you might say, well, my book is not either one of those things. It's about how to buy real estate without a lot of cash. Oh, so in other words, you're saying that you can buy real estate without having a lot of cash. So you're writing a book on empowering people that they can do something. Well, no, it's more about the techniques that you use to actually do it. Oh, so you're really telling them that they should do it because the techniques work. So it's always an act of persuasion. When I realized that, and I started looking at other books, like Tim Ferriss's books come to mind, Malcolm Gladwell's books come to mind. And I don't, I'm not saying that, hey, look, I'm just as great as Malcolm Gladwell. I don't compare myself to others, but I do notice similarities and patterns. And when I connected those dots, it suddenly made it easy because I realized, oh, so here's the PASTOR of this book, the broad outline. Here's the PASTOR of each section. And I just need to make the same outline for each chapter. And it suddenly made it easy to write because it was more like filling in the blanks in an outline than it was coming up with something creative with every page. You still have to be creative. You still have to write. There's no getting around that. If you want to write, you have to have written.
Love it. Love it. Those are great tips, Ray. Hey, Chandler Bolt here. I hope you're loving this episode so far. It's time to go from inspiration to implementation. All right, so if you've learned something, we want to help you implement what you've learned with your book. So what I want you to do right now is go to selfpublishing.com/schedule, book a publishing consultation with one of the experts on my team. We'll talk about your goals for your book, your dreams, your challenges, your next steps, and we'll start putting together a plan. All right, so go to selfpublishing.com/schedule, book a call with the team. Let's see how we can help with your book. It's time to implement. Now, you obviously write a lot, writing copy, whether it's writing a book, producing a ton of content on your blog. So, I mean, you're pretty much a content machine. So my question is, how do you stay fresh? And then how do you keep the content coming at such an aggressive pace?
Well, I think that, Stephen King wrote in his book on writing, he said, there's two things you have to do if you want to be a writer. One is you have to read a lot. And the second thing is you have to write a lot. And so I took that to heart, and I'm always putting material in the blender, so to speak. I'm reading all kinds of things, magazines, newspapers, the Wall Street Journal, the Economist, Simple Magazine, Oprah Magazine. I've got this app on my iPad called Texture. I don't know if you've heard of it. It used to be called Next Issue. You pay like $16 a month, and you get like 50 magazine subscriptions. You get the digital version of them. So it's got women's magazines, men's magazines, not the naughty kind, but the good kind, like Outdoor, GQ, and things like that. And popular science and like politics and finance, like Fortune and Entrepreneur are on there. So like every magazine you could think of for the price of what you'd pay for two at the bookstore, you get the new issues every month. So I read many of those. I read lots of books. I read lots of blogs. I listen to lots of podcasts. And the real magic secret sauce for me is Evernote. I just think up titles. Like I think that would make a good title. Like we were at a mastermind meeting a few days ago, and it's a mastermind that people pay me to be in. And it's the funny thing. I think you do the same kind of thing. And I learn as much from them as they learn from me, if not more, because I'm like, to me, there's easier ways to make money than the paid mastermind. So I didn't realize that when I first started it. At first I was like, oh, this would be a lot of money I can make. And then I realized it's a lot of work to run a paid mastermind, but I'm always soaking up the ideas. And one thing that was discussed was pop-ups on your website. And through discussion, I realized, you know what? Even though they're effective, I'm not going to use pop-ups anymore because of the discussion we had, which was we started talking about how does it make you feel when you see a pop-up? And I'm not judging anybody who uses pop-ups. Until 2 days ago, I used them too. So I'm not making you bad or wrong. I just made a decision for my blog for the reasons that I will describe in my blog post. I just wrote a title down in my Evernote file that I keep titles in that said, why I ditched pop-ups on my blog. So that'll become a blog post. And I've got a file that's got a ton of titles like that in there. I don't have the content dreamed up. I just know the central idea of the post, and it'll turn into a post or a chapter in a book or maybe a white paper or a manifesto. But for me, it's just about the title. If I can get the catchy title, the rest of it will come.
So those are titles that you'll use for blog posts. They could be chapters in a book. They could be any of those things. And it seems like you start with those titles. You also read a lot. Now, are you a book guy, or are you more of a bite-sized content guy?
I'm both. I love books. I have at least 2 books going at all times because I have a morning routine where I do a lot of reading and writing. So one of the first things I do when I get up in the morning after I've got my coffee and I've had my healthy shake is I sit down and I read the Bible. I have a reading plan for reading the Bible. And then I read a spiritual book, and then I read a nonfiction book, not the entire book, but a section of each of those kinds of books. And then I journal and I write about what I learned from what I read. Because I think too often we read things and we don't glean anything from it. It goes in and out and we forget about it. And so every day I'm trying to figure out one thing that I learned from what I read today. And I keep track of that in day one. That's what I do my journaling in. And if it's good enough, if I have a real powerful insight, like, oh, I want to write about that, then I'll grab that and pop it into my Evernote file with all my titles in it. And there goes another title. So when it comes time to sit down and write a blog post, when I hit my writing time every day, and I have a time I set aside every day to write, it's not a huge amount of time. I wish I had 4 hours a day to write, but I don't. I have about an hour. So I get all my writing done in about an hour a day. And I just go to my Evernote file and I scroll through the titles and I find the one that jumps out at me that makes me feel like, oh, I know exactly what I want to say about that. And I start writing. And that's how I do it. It's really not a big secret. The secret is now out.
So you do that, and you do that daily for an hour a day. Do you ever go longer than that? Do you batch stuff? Is it just kind of consistently day by day, or how does your process for that work?
Sometimes I go longer. If I'm writing a long sales letter or like the script for a sales video, there's a volume of writing you have to do in a certain amount of time. And so then I have to be disciplined and set aside and say, okay, I need 4 hours a day for 3 days to get this project done, because I know about how long it's going to take me. So I'll block that time out, and I have a timer, and every 30 minutes I get up and I move around, drink some water, break my focus, then I get back and I focus in for another 30 minutes. It's a typical thing that lots of people do, but it works. That's why lots of people do it. And then sometimes I have a lot of stuff planned for the day and I just get on a roll. I get writing and I feel like, oh, I'm in the zone. So I'll send a message to my assistant and say, cancel everything today. I'm writing. And then I just focus in. If I hit that, I don't wait for inspiration to hit. I find that usually inspiration hits more frequently if I more frequently sit down at the keyboard and ask it to hit. But sometimes, Chandler, you know this, sometimes it's just like it's coming through you and you're like, oh, I cannot interrupt this. I got to get this while it's happening. And sometimes that's coming so fast and furious that I will, yes, I worked a movie title in. I will dictate what I'm writing instead of typing it. I'm not the world's fastest typist, and I'm certainly not the world's best typist, as anybody who's ever proofread my writing knows. So I'm at my best actually when I'm dictating, and I can dictate about 125 to 150 words a minute. And if you do the math, that's a lot of pages in an hour. So I can get a lot of writing done that way. And I just send it off to good old rev.com, RomeoEchoVictor.com, and they type it up for me. And then I have somebody edit it for me because I don't want to do that. I don't like detail work. But, you can do all these things manually if you don't have the budget to do it. You can use drag and dictate if you don't want to pay every time. But that's the way I do it with rev.com if I'm on a roll and I need to go fast.
How often do you hit that roll? And then how often do you dictate rather than type?
It happens at least once a week. And I don't know if that sounds like a lot for some people or it sounds like not much for some people, but sometimes there are many days where I just want to have my fingers on the keyboard. There's sometimes it just feels like that's the way it needs to come out. And I know that sounds like, oh, you're so like an artist. You have a way it has to come out. It's not that. It's just the mood that I'm in. It's like sometimes you want to watch the McNeil Lear NewsHour and sometimes you want to watch Dancing with the Stars. Why? Who knows? It just has to happen that way. But when I have a big project, like I'm working on a book, I know that the key thing is, or sales letter, the key thing is to get the first draft out. And you teach this, the biggest challenge is getting that first draft done because it's easy to edit something. It's really difficult to edit nothing. So you need to have something first. So I typically, when I'm either either I hit on an inspiration and I just get going, or more typically, this is if I'm transparent about it. Now that I think through this, when I get on those big roles of dictating, I'm usually working on a book or a big sales letter or script. And that's when I make a detailed outline ahead of time. I map out, well, what are the points I need to make? What's the logical structure that needs to happen? I mean, the more of that you can do ahead of time, the more trouble you save yourself later on, as you know. And then I will dictate, and I know exactly what I'm going to say, maybe not word for word, but I know in this section I need to talk about this principle or idea. In the next section, I need to connect it to the next idea. And so I just keep going and I just keep talking. And if I get stuck for something to say, the people who transcribe my dictation must have a ball, because I'll just say, and now I don't know what I'm going to talk about next. So you, dear transcriptionist, can take a break. You can go get some coffee, or you can type every word I'm saying. It's up to you, because I'll get back to it in just a minute. Oh, I know. Here's the next thing I want to say. And then I'll just go right into it. And I don't edit it. I just send it to them just like it is. And it's always funny to see their responses. Sometimes they just type it up and they make no comment. Sometimes they put a comment in like, this was funny. I can't believe you did this. But it's just fun. And so I do believe, frankly, that we're in an age where it's so easy to dictate and get that turned into type. I don't know why anybody would write a long form book any other way, frankly.
Love it. And I know that that particular method has been helpful for a lot of people, myself included, because especially if you're one of those that talks easier than you write, right? It's like, okay, cool. I can just talk much faster and much easier, and the stuff's going to flow better. So love that. That's a great tip. Now talk to us a little bit about your rapid writing method and kind of what that looks like and how that applies to writing a book.
So the rapid writing method really is based on that dictation model. And that is the rapid writing method, is to dictate, because you can speak faster than you can write. I don't care how fast a typist you are, unless you have a speech impediment, you can definitely talk faster than you can type. And if you have an outline, you can roll through your first draft really fast. So my basic recommendation is to make an outline, know what you're going to be writing about, have your central idea figured out, like use the pastor framework, or we have some worksheets in rapid writing method. It's a course that we teach. We have worksheets people can go through to decide on what their topic is going to be if they don't know, and what they're going to answer about that topic. And one simple formula that works if you just want to get a book cranked out and you want to make that first impact on the marketplace to be a published author. And especially if you have an expertise in a certain area, just think about, okay, so I'm an expert in chainsaw sculpture making, carving bears and salmon, giant salmon out of tree trunks. So what are the top 10 questions that people have about chainsaw carving? Well, I just write down what those top 10 questions are, the ones that come up the most often. I know because I get them all the time. And then I write an intro to my book and I say, this is what my book is going to be about. And I jot down a little outline. Then I write down the top 10 questions. And those 10 questions are the 10 chapters of the book. And so in this method, there's 12 chapters to every book. There's the intro chapter that I just talked about. This is what the book is about, what you're going to get from reading it. Then there's the top 10 questions. That's 10 chapters. And then there's a wrap-up chapter. That's, what do you do now? And if you think about it, the first chapter, what this book is about, who's it for, what problem does it solve, what pain does it relieve, that's the pastor framework. And then the 10 steps in the middle are the rest of the framework, right up until you get to the call to action, which is at the end, request a response. That's chapter 12, which is now what do you do? What comes next? And so you outline all that using the pastor framework in my world. I mean, there's different ways to do this, but this is how I recommend people do it. It's how I teach people to do it. And then after you've outlined all that, you just dictate it. I encourage people to dictate it as fast as they possibly can. Stumbles, ums, ahs, curse words when they get angry and say the wrong thing. I mean, basically, it's part of my code not to curse, but you hit your thumb with a hammer, things happen. And you get it dictated, you get it sent off, and you get that transcript back, and you realize, wow, I've got 100 pages that I wrote in a day. It's a mess. It's a hot mess, but it's been written in a day. And then you have a choice. I personally like to go over it the first time myself and kind of take out the big, obvious, ugly chunks that I don't like and rearrange things a little bit. But I don't do too much of that, because once I've cleaned up most of that, I send it off to an editor and they make it all grammatically correct. And then I have to go back and fix the things they made too correct. And then the book is done. So that's a really nutshell version of the rapid writing method. But I mean, I've written, when I first discovered that it was possible to do this, I wrote 2 books in a weekend.
Wow.
So, and I mean, you do similar things and you've mastered similar techniques and you have your own systems that you use, and people are shocked when they hear that. When I first heard somebody say that you could do that kind of thing, it made me angry. I was at a seminar. It's no bad reflection on the guy. I'll just tell you, it was James Malinchak. Do you know James?
Yes. And I've heard this exact thing you're talking about.
And he stands up and he says, I've written, 5,000 books, and I don't write books. I create books. I have my talks transcribed and they type them up and I print them into a book, and it's a book. I created the book. I didn't write it. And it made me angry. I was sitting in the back of the room and I was all Mr. Attitude. I was like, that's just crappy books. The world does not need more crappy books. And something inside me spoke up and said, well, Ray, you're acting like a spoiled brat and a snob. And aren't you the guy who always says you should be an eternal student? And now you've decided you know everything. And I was very humbled by that internal voice. I realized, okay, time for me to change my attitude. And so I put on the rubber band thing he had us all wear and snap when our attitude was bad, and put it up in the air. And I played all the silly reindeer games, and it was the best conference I'd been to in a long time. And I went back to my hotel room that night and I was like, well, what have I written that I could turn into a book? And I realized I had a whole blog full of material, and I started looking through it and I realized, wow, I could pull together these 12 posts and they would make a book. So I pulled together the 2 manuscripts, the rough first draft of 2 manuscripts that night. So it actually was in one night. The next morning I went into the seminar room and I had a totally different attitude now. I was like, I wrote 2 books last night. Well, I created 2 books last night. So it's a shift in paradigm. It's a shift in seeing what's possible. And if you don't have a blog that's got a bunch of posts on it, don't be discouraged. You got a ton of stuff up here in the treasure chest that is your brain, things that you know. If you just think through it carefully, you've got plenty of material. You can dictate a book in a weekend for sure.
And which Malinchak event was that?
That was, let's see, what does he call it? Really big money speaker.
Yep.
Boot camp. Yep.
The big money speaker boot camp. Gosh, yep. You know what was funny? I thought about that is there was a comment he said, my crappy book's better than the book you ain't got.
Yes. I've quoted that many times. My crappy book is 100% better than the book you don't have.
Yep.
Like, ouch.
Yep. That'll get you right there. Awesome. We're in the home stretch here. Just a couple final questions. How have your copywriting skills, or how have you used your copywriting skills to sell more books? Like, how does that carry over to the selling of books?
Oh, I mean, dude, it's everything, because the copy on the front cover of your book is copy. The idea is like a headline. It catches people's attention. The copy on the back of your book needs to get people to, what's the goal? The goal of the front cover is to get them to flip it over and look at the back cover. The goal of the back cover is to get them to open it up and look at the table of contents. And the goal of the table of contents is to sell the freaking book. And that's why, if you read my table of contents, they read like headlines because they're designed to make people feel like, oh, well, I got to know the thing that's in chapter 7, so I'm going to buy this book. So that's what I recommend to people. And in fact, I've actually developed a further philosophy on that. From now on, every book I publish will have a chapter title in the table of contents plus 2 or 3 sentences about what the chapter is about. So it'll be like a chapter title, and in a sales letter, it would be a bullet point about why this chapter is so important. And it's a sales letter for the book. And then also the first chapter, people often read the first chapter. So for gosh sakes, don't put an introduction in your book. It's a boring, like, writing a book is a big project that involves many people. And I just want to thank this long list of names of people you've never heard of. Snooze alarm. The first chapter in your book needs to sell your freaking book. It needs to say, have you tried every diet in the world and they all failed? You're still fat and look like a slob and are embarrassed to take off your shirt at the pool. I'm finally the guy who's going to tell you the truth about why you have that problem and how you're going to solve it. And that's what this book is all about, because I got sick and tired of all the BS in the marketplace about how to do this right. So I decided I would have to write the book myself. It needs to be something visceral like that grabs people, makes people go, yes, it's about time somebody told the truth about that. And you and I both know the truth is you need to eat less and move more, but that's another story for a different time. So then it's, every chapter you're selling in the first few sentences, you're selling people on reading the chapter. And as you go through the chapter, you're selling them in every paragraph on finishing the chapter. And at the end of the chapter, you're selling them on reading the next chapter. So, two things that in my nonfiction books that I've started doing and I will continue to do is I have a checklist at the end of every chapter. I got this from Chip and Dan Heath, actually. They have, in their books, they have a thing at the end of each chapter. It's called This Whole Chapter in a Page.
Yeah.
Genius. Because
I just finished reading Decisive, the first book I've read by them, and it's amazing. Such a great idea.
So that's why my book, How to Write Copy That Sells, has a page like that at the end of every chapter. In fact, in my first draft, those pages were called This Whole Chapter in a Single Page. But then I thought, well, that's a little close, so maybe I won't do that. But I do that, and then I also say at the end of each chapter, in the next chapter, we'll explore how to do the next thing. So I want to thread people through the entire book so they read the entire book, because I don't want to put one word more in the book than needs to be there. And that's the other thing that I've discovered these days. There are great books that are written that are 400 and 500 pages long. I just finished reading a biography of John Adams, which seemed like it was 12,000 pages long. But it was good. It was a powerful book, but it was super long. And people generally don't have the patience for that anymore. People want short, quick reads that give them a good, quick, either motivation, inspiration, burst of energy, a quick how-to, a way to have a quick win in a certain area of life. So, my goal is to keep my books at about 110 pages or so. I think that's the number, because the reason for that number is it's the exact number of pages required on Amazon CreateSpace to be able to print something on the spine of the book. That's why I want that book to be that long. Because if you see my book on a shelf and it's real skinny and it makes a lot of great promises about what you're going to get from it, and then you see somebody else's book on the shelf and it's 350 pages long and it's like tiny little type, which book are you going to buy? Most people are going to buy the shorter book because they feel like, well, I'll read that.
Yeah. Well, and which one are you going to start reading? 100% the shorter book.
And which one are you going to finish reading? 100% the shorter book.
Love it. Final question, Ray. What will be your parting tip for someone thinking about writing their first book?
Stop thinking and start writing. Just do whatever it takes to write. I have two things to share. On my office wall, I would go get it, but it's too long to take the headphones off and go over and get it. You just have to trust me. There's a picture on my office wall. I'm looking at it right now. It's a photograph of E.B. White sitting in his beach house, which was a shed on the beach. It has a wooden table, an ashtray on the wooden table, a garbage can, and a typewriter and a stack of paper, and he's typing away. And that's all that's in his office. And that picture is to remind me that all you need is you and a message and some way to write it down. You don't need anything else. And the other thing I'll share is when I was still in the radio business and I was talking about wanting to be a writer and make my living writing, I hate to admit this, but I complained about it all the time. I would say to my wife, just one day, if I just didn't have to work so hard this radio job, I'd love to be a writer. And she finally said to me one day, I said, I really want to be a writer. I just want to write full time. And she said, no, you don't. I was like shocked. I'm like, what? I just told you that I do. How can you tell me that I don't? She said, because if you wanted to, you would do it. You're doing exactly what you want to do most. So either change what you're doing or stop complaining about it. And that's the moment that I decided, okay, she's right. I don't like admitting it, but she's right. So I would say to you, do you want to write or do you want to write? It's a choice you got to make. Just sit down and start scribbling.
That's such a great distinction. And just a sign that you have an amazing wife that would tell you that, and that would shoot you straight on that. So that's awesome. Well, Ray, thank you so much for coming on and just sharing so much knowledge with us today. Where can people go to find out more about you and what you're up to?
The place to go is rayedwards.com. And you can find the podcast. I got a free newsletter, a bunch of free tutorials, information, just gobs of stuff designed to make you love me.
Awesome. RayEdwards.com. Well, Ray, thanks again. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Chandler. It's my honor and privilege.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you can be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. All right, number 1, I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number 2, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts, number 2, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number 3, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help this podcast get discovered by other people. So number 3, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode. If you're on the fence about scheduling a publishing consultation call with my team, maybe you're not quite ready for that, I've got some free training that I think will be really helpful for you. All right, all you have to do is go to register to sign up. Go to selfpublishing.com/free training. When you do, you're also going to get a free digital copy of my new book published. And on that training, you're going to learn the next steps, so how to implement with your book. So how to write, how to publish, how to launch successfully. So go to register right now at selfpublishing.com/free training. I'll see you there.